Welcome to the inaugural MSCAC Talk Series. This is a new series that we're just launching here at the University of Toronto to bring together our students, our faculty, and our industry partners to have conversations about where technology is going, what we can do collectively to build the technology ecosystem in Toronto, in Canada, and to hear about exciting developments.
We're really glad that everyone's here to join us today. I'll be moderating today's talk, where we'll hear from Dr. Eugene Fiume. Professor Fiume is an internationally recognized leader in the field of computer graphics and visual modeling. Just a few of his academic accomplishments include fellowships at the Royal Society of Canada and the Eurographics Association. In addition to his academic achievements, Dr. Fiume is a leader in bridging academic and industrial research. Dr. Fiume is presently the Dean of Applied Sciences at SFU, but he's also the first director of the MSCAC program. So it seems very fitting for us to hear from him for the first talk in our series. His talk will tell us about how the technological advances of the past decade have not only shaped the practice of computing, but also changed the nature of applied research itself. So a little bit of housekeeping. The talk will run for 25 to 30 minutes, followed by a short Q&A for 15 minutes. And we encourage the audience to submit their Q&A questions throughout the talk. But please do so through the Q&A feature on Zoom and not through the chat feature. So we will take the Q&A topics from the Q&A slot. So without further ado, I'll open the floor to Dr. Fiume for his talk about the changing face of applied research and entrepreneurship.
Thanks so much, Tom. And it's just really a treat to be here. Maybe I'll try to be reasonably controversial and talk about just the nature of entrepreneurship and innovation. It's a word I don't like to use very much, but we may as well just once. And one of the things I'd like to start with first is, Tom talked about a variety of awards and things, and when I reflect on that, I realize that most of that is some combination of luck, serendipity, the right people at the right time, teamwork, collaboration. Did I say luck again? So many things just seem to just happen, and being in the right place at the right time and being equipped with the right tools does seem to have an effect. And the thing I'd like to argue from the point of view of applied research and impact in industry is the importance of programs like the MSCAC. What do you learn that's different? Well, those of you who've gone through the program know. There's academic rigor combined with internships, combined with the fact it's a cohort-based system, and that you tend to work in teams anyway. And all of those things are the things that are really important to be successful in an industrial research and development career, or just as a prominent person having impact in industry. So there's nothing really that's changed about the MSCAC in terms of its fundamental properties. It still is as deeply relevant as before because the structure is right. And I think it does capture the essential ingredients for success once you go outward. But I do want to talk a little bit about applied research and entrepreneurship. When the program first started in 2010, I actually had to explain what applied research was. And perhaps Arvind is in the same position now, but I think it's probably an easier call. And the way I explained it was by basically pointing people to the SHRED website, the Scientific Research and Experimental Design website, because that's what companies tended to write off their R&D expenses with. I felt that was a little bit coy in many ways, because it didn't really capture the focus that I personally wanted to achieve through those internships. But what has happened is a very dramatic shift in the nature of the roles. Because back in 2010, 11, 12, and so on, there was very little in the way of data science or machine learning that was really being employed by any of the companies. It was much more about synthetic models and programmatic approaches. I'm going to argue a little later that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that when we employ techniques from artificial intelligence and machine learning, reinforcement learning, and so on, we have to remember, really, these are simply an additional set of tools that we can use, particularly when the models that we have of a phenomenon are either non-existent or unpredictable or just not robust enough. And often with the inclusion of data, we can make progress in finding correlations that help. And I'll actually talk about that in a few minutes. So one of the things the other thing I want to talk about is the nature of entrepreneurship in the 2020s. When I listen to Silicon Valley people, what I largely hear is 20th century thinking, not 21st century thinking. And I'll make the point even more strongly. Unicorns are a 20th century phenomenon. What's the big deal about $1 billion company? The important thing is that we add impact at the right time in the right place, scale appropriately, and have a great time doing it, and hopefully make a good living at it. The nature of the Silicon Valley scale-up approach essentially means that we have way more bosses. And if the whole goal of being an entrepreneur or doing licensing or getting out in industry and working in industry, the whole goal of that is to exercise personal impact. One has to be careful about taking on too much financing and trying to join a particular club that I'm not so sure I personally want to be a part of. But that's just something to reflect on if you're thinking about making your way out into industry on your own as an entrepreneur and creating the right kind of team to go forward. I'll put an even stronger point on it. I've asked several entrepreneurs from the 20th century what characterizes success, and almost uniformly the answer is the exit. So what if you don't want to exit? What if you want to create a sustainable business that contributes, whether it's a small, medium, or large company, that contributes in a certain way? So I find, again, it's 20th century thinking that in which we think about the size of an exit rather than the quality of the experience and the effect that one has on society overall. So I guess all that's to say that funding should follow the mission and the ambition rather than the other way around. Another thing I'll say is I think we're going to see a very strong effect of COVID in terms of how we work with others going forward. And I will talk about it in my personal experience with this company, Jolly. But I will say that one of the things I've learned in the past 2 years is the importance of strategic collaboration rather than finding money to dominate and buy out other companies. There's a very good reason for it. When you buy a company, you've got to do a significant amount of due diligence and find out if, in fact, that company is a fit. Once you decide it's a fit, you have to somehow create a long-range model that assures you that it will continue to be a fit. And that, to my mind, is rather problematic in the kind of environments that I see emerging, in which there's a much stronger requirement on nimbleness, connectivity, integration, and so on. So really, I guess the punchline there is collaboration, not domination. The fact is, once one puts together a strategic partnership, one can actually work with multiple partners and develop an environment in which there's interoperation and some level of collaboration and exchange of IP, for example, that can be done in an appropriately papered way that allows companies really nicely to interoperate, create some synergies. When things are done, they're done, or you continue and scale appropriately. So decentralization of mission or of components, but centralization of mission is something that's kind of an interesting thing to reflect on. And I'd be interested to see if, for those of you who are out there, so to speak, beyond the MSCAC program itself, if you've actually had a similar experience. So what I'd like to do, and I do want to keep this this discussion relatively short with me doing the monologue so that we can go back and forth. I'd like to talk about this company, Jolly, that we put together at the University of Toronto and have since kind of developed. So, you know, I do have kind of this interest in tech transfer and in industrial R&D, and I've spent time there. But really, I'm primarily, when I'm not a dean, I'm primarily a scientist, and I am interested in scientific problems. From the get-go, when we came upon this idea to animate faces in a way that articulated voice in a good way, and in fact that it articulated a vocal performance, when we hit upon that, I realized it was an entirely different beast from what I've done in the past. Normally, you know, I continue to work in areas like fluid dynamics, and, you know, I want to simulate an explosion, or I want to simulate a fire, clouds, water that's flowing. It's a very singular phenomenon. It's got a bunch of degrees of freedom, but it's a singular phenomenon. It's water flowing, you know, and sometimes you have it interact with other things, but the pieces kind of come together within some kind of physical framework. When we started talking about animated faces, we were in a very different world. We had a situation in which, I'm just checking chat, okay, that's fine. We had a situation in which there were multiple disciplines that needed to be looked at simultaneously. So when you think about the face, you think about an anatomy, you think about the biomechanics of the face, you think about the actions and poses that a face can assume. Then you think, okay, well, that's the structure, that's the outward structure, but there's voice that comes through the larynx and through the windpipe, which we don't model very well at all, actually. There's the tongue. There's a linguistic component. There's the neurolinguistics associated with that. There's computational linguistics that helps us put that all together. There's cognitive science that talk about behaviors. Naturally, there's, you know, the stuff that I know really well, computer graphics and character animation, making things look good. But there's also real-time systems work. There's cloud processing. There's signal processing. Lots of procedural animation and a whole set of other things. So in other words, it's science, but it's science that's integrative, and that actually was a huge challenge. But the consequence of that is that it ends up being a very robust approach. So we wrote this up in 2016. It was accepted at Siggraph, which is kind of the premier conference in computer graphics, written essentially still as a science paper. But computer graphics is one of those areas where you'll never know who's sitting in the audience. Back in the day when there were people sitting in audiences. Some of those folks came to see us, a bunch of companies, but one of them was this company, Project Red, well, CDPR, a Polish company that had released a game called Witcher. I think we were up to Witcher 3 at the time. And they had this new game that had been in the works and was becoming kind of famous, called Cyberpunk 2077. And what they suggested was, you know, kind of one of those, dudes, we like your work, why don't we work together? And that was the first time I got an inkling that maybe we could do things differently than in the past. We formed a company and we struck a strategic partnership with them and worked for quite some time on within their workflow, because at the end of the day, what we want is to, you know, enhance the creativity, not necessarily the productivity, by the way, the creativity and the experience that that content creators will have. So we worked for almost 3 years on this, at least a year longer than we wanted, because there were some production delays, and those familiar with the business and in particular with Cyberpunk know that it was released rather late. We were hoping that we would get a significant uptick from being associated with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk 2077. So we waited, and it was tough. That was definitely a sweat equity situation. We got a little bit of money from them, but it really wasn't, and it was barely enough for us to pay the bills. But what we found upon release was an avalanche of attention. For one thing, I know the numbers regarding the games business, but I hadn't really recognized how many zeros truly are associated with that industry and the prominence of that industry. It's way bigger than movies, way larger than streaming film and so on. It is a gigantic industry, and we caught the wave. We were lucky because games are moving to narrative and to dialogue. So what did the CDPR want from us? Well, they wanted, there's approximately 50 hours of dialogue for every language that they support, and I think it was 10 languages. Absolutely impossible to hand animate that. But what we had was a technology that would work automatically, but that would also, for main characters, it could be used and could be edited so that additional features could be put in. And on top of that, there was a real strength in what we call paralinguals, but behaviors that are associated with speech. When you blink, when you look around, like, when you move your hands, that kind of thing, associated with speech. So we had a solution that in which there were really two inputs to our speech synchronization and performance model: the actual textual script, potentially tagged with some interesting things, and the soundtrack. And implicit in that are the rigs of the characters themselves. And from there, we automatically animate the face with appropriate speech synchronization across multiple languages. So this turned out to be another kind of science project that was essentially funded by them as part of this. And if it's not familiar to you, this is a classic bootstrapping model. And it's something that I really would advocate if you're able. If you're in a startup world, if you have the opportunity to explore a bootstrapping model where through strategic partnerships, incremental revenue, you kind of spin that around so that you keep your IP, that you keep kind of diffusing the results of your work further and further, use that to develop your technology. What you get at the end of it, if you're lucky enough, is a technology that really is purpose-built and that is improved for the market you're addressing. And we have found it to be a very exciting process. So maybe at this point, I will try to show you a demo video of this, just so that you get a sense. Share screen and optimize for video. I hope you'll hear this. The biggest problem with animation that has sound is synchronizing the sound and the animation. So I hope it will work for you, but let's see what happens. Now. Yes, thank you for that, Dina. I need to just find the video. There it is. Okay, I might play it twice. And maybe at some point, maybe Tom, you could give me a thumbs up as to whether or not people are seeing it.
Wait, this is totally wrong. I do not.
So just to give you a sense of what's happening here, these characters come from a company called Lateral. They're becoming a very strong player in the so-called rigging and character world. Essentially, they have this database called metahumans of extremely well captured faces, actually whole bodies. We're focusing on the face, but one thing I want you to notice: there's no tongue. And I kept wondering, why does this look bad? I actually don't find this lip syncing to look particularly good. I think it looks bad because there's no tongue. So have a look.
Exist for your animation. I am conscious and I am self-aware.
What Jolly tries to do is it tries to get to the root of what is being expressed in the vocal performance and put that on a 3D character.
I have free will.
I knew this since I was 3 years old.
Jolly is a suite of tools and a suite of services that result in what we think is the coolest and best and highest quality facial performance on characters.
We're okay. There's nothing wrong with us.
Based not on handcrafted animation, but on procedural animation, based on audio dialogue, audio speech from a voice actor.
Slow, deep breaths.
So I'd like you to pay a little bit of attention to this, because here you're going to see the face, and then the face will be integrated with the character. What I'd like you to pay attention to is the blinks of her eyes, the nods of her head. And that's what I mean by these associated behaviors that for which we had some automatic solutions.
Voice actor.
Slow, deep breaths. Your cortisol and adrenaline spiked, but the soft activated your hormone blockers. Nothing happened. You're alive and well.
The Quality of Mercy from The Merchant of Venice, Act 4, Scene 1.
Come andrà tutto bene se tantissime persone?
We want to see not only good lip sync, but a great facial performance in each of these languages.
Sobre a venda de bolsas.
我的过程是，如果你有热情，你会变成成功。
矢口か。だが気をつけな。俺は今ネイリバナ起こされて機嫌が悪いんだ。
Il a fait très beau aujourd'hui. Je suis allé à la piscine cet après-midi et je suis allé voir un film ce soir.
If the lip sync is right, you don't notice. If the faces match the performance, you don't notice because you're too busy paying attention to how awesome the game is, how much you care about these characters. And that's what we want. That to me is the sizzle.
So I hope you saw that. I can't be sure. Tom, did it come out? Great. And please do feel free to have a look at that demo reel at home, so that you can actually see it at full res and without the internet getting in the way. So I hope that gives you a sense then of some of the core technology that's there, this idea of a vocal performance, not just making the lips move. By the way, JAWLI stands for jaw lip animation. We discovered essentially that we could project many of the degrees of freedom of speaking to jaw and lip action. And having 2 dimensions versus say 20 is an awful lot easier for us to work with, and it's a lot easier for animators to work with. So that's the overall technology. Now, what's interesting about this, we did a subsequent talk at Siggraph regarding our relationship with CD Projekt Red, and I'm just look it up on YouTube. What's remarkable about them is that normally these Siggraph talks get kind of 15,000 views, but we forgot again about the nature of the audience, and some pretty unforgiving audience at times as well, in which the views would be between 350 and 500,000 views for a kind of a technical video. So clearly we were again on the wave of something, and so far what we've been able to do is run completely on revenue. We've taken no financing, and we feel that we're in control of our destiny, for better or worse. Of course, we consult with many people, but one of the things I want to just mention, kind of to top this off, is that we know our current skill set. It's really with facial vocal performance, and we're starting to move down the body. We're getting neck, and we're going to have, I'm Italian, so you have gesture. But the thing that we don't do well is connection. It is, in fact, we don't do AI. In particular, I actually don't even like the term AI for that matter, because it's artificial intelligence, which is artificial but not necessarily intelligent. But that's a longer story. What we are interested in, though, is connecting our technology with others who are experts in things like natural language processing, so that you could have digital avatars, digital assistants, characters that act a little more spontaneously. What you discover in those situations is that our real-time solutions, or at least interactive solutions, we find ourselves waiting for the natural language processing and other AI stuff to actually finish. So there's some latencies there. And what we've discovered is that there's latency in the way people interact too, but people hide latency. And it's really hard for characters to hide latency. So that's actually a very interesting research topic on its own. How do we hide latency, recognizing that these problems always arise? So lots of things to say there, but the coupling, we found that we've been able to work with a wide variety of companies on what I'm calling co-dev or co-development projects. We all benefit from that. We don't worry about buying each other out. What we worry about is creating good connections so that we mutually benefit by this kind of network of technologies that integrate and interoperate. Now, is this too idealistic? It could well be that this does not work in many other situations, but given the moving parts in content development, we think this is the right way to go. And we'll just see. Now, personally, I'm not really a game player, but what we are realizing is that the revenue that we're getting from games allows us to explore other things. And from a scientific perspective, I really want to look at therapeutic applications of this. So what did we learn from this, apart from you know, the nature of collaboration and so on? One is that, you know, this is going to sound very vanilla, but we have to use the best tools for the job. And what we've discovered is our competition is not always doing so because they're jumping on bandwagons. They're using machine learning to do, for example, a lot of this kind of matching, and it just looks cheesy. Good content developers, good character animators simply won't accept it. We have found ourselves in situations where we produce content and the response from a client will be, looks too Western. And now trying to learn what that is really an interesting exercise. So we really use procedural tools and algorithmic tools for the most part, but there are places where machine learning is really key, actually. One is to learn a corpus. What does that mean? We have to be able to align syllables, phonemes, the actual utterances that come from voice. We have to align them with the text, with a textual correspondence. And what's interesting about that is that, first of all, we do need a lot of data. We need lots of examples of people speaking the same language in different ways and statistically converging to the mean that allows for nuanced articulation of phonemes with respect to the textual symbols that are presented. The other thing that's interesting, we actually use bias as a tool. Now, there's a huge discussion, as you know, regarding bias, the bias that happens in machine learning algorithms. The outputs of machine learning are only as good as the data. But what I mean by bias here, suppose we want to actually capture an accent or some speech effect of some sort. All we need is a corpus that has that. It's biased with respect to the way the language is normally spoken, but in fact, it could well be what people really want. So it's just an interesting aspect. Use the tools that are most readily available for the job. And in that case, we are using some machine learning, but what we do is hardly AI. It's essentially very significantly model-based. So a couple of takeaways. Some of these things are not at all, most of them are not surprising. We have a very clear differentiation. For us, it's vocal performance. We focus on collaboration and co-development. And as a consequence, it allows us to build the team that we need for the stuff we're best at, and then we interoperate. In the last moment or so, I want to talk a tiny bit about AI. AI in the field. It's AI, machine learning, reinforcement learning, and other approaches, CNNs and so on, are remarkably interesting scientific pathways. And over the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to see some really interesting developments. But the thing that we need to be aware of in the use of artificial intelligence technologies, especially those that have some statistical perspective, is certification of the results. We want to be able to say these results are right almost all of the time, but be able to quantify the almost. And this is extremely hard in a lot of the algorithmic implementations of machine learning techniques in various spaces. Since I'm the dean of an applied sciences faculty that has 3 engineering schools in it, one of the things that has been really brought home to me is the notion of certification. How can one certify that something works? Both in the design side, when one puts together a design of some engineering, some part, some system, and how does one validate that to the point where an engineer with a PEng is able to certify that it works? This is problematic in a lot of areas, and you could ask, well, don't we have that problem in kind of things like MRIs and that kind of stuff where there's randomness? Indeed, that is a problem. What we've done is come up with a statistical characterization of the signals that MRI units and CT scanners and so on put together, and we can say something statistically true about the result. And this is a problematic space for machine learning in the field. I'm sure we're going to get closer, but it's something I'd be happy to discuss that further in Q&A, and happy to be disabused of that. The other thing I would say, of all of the technologies within artificial intelligence, natural language processing is absolutely key to becoming more socially relevant. We are going to have conversant characters, avatars, and PDAs. So with that, I think I will stop and be happy to take any questions or get yelled at by anyone who wants to. Thanks very much.
Okay, great. That was awesome. So I do have some questions here. What can we do to foster a homegrown innovation economy? So specifically, how do we encourage entrepreneurs to scale up as opposed to selling out?
I'm not sure those are, let's see now, scale up as opposed to selling out. You can still stay small. You can run a boutique business. We are infected by this idea of growth at all costs. We don't have to. Now, some things do have to grow. Shopify had to grow into what it did, because it needed to become a platform for a huge range, huge spectrum of sellers. So absolutely, there are some situations where scaling up is absolutely key. But there is what the questionnaire is pointing to is a more traditional problem of how one maintains one's integrity as a company and has the patience to let it develop before being besieged by money, parents, board members, or whatever that want you to make an exit. This is a really interesting question. I think Canadians are starting to learn to be more patient, but it's a really interesting question because it's really largely a psychological condition. The other thing that I'm noticing, I've spoken with a bunch of VCs on this, is that there are a lot of companies that don't want to take their money because it's not about the money. It's about who you are and what value you can add to the CEO and to the C-suite team and so on. So I'd like to say that the situation actually is changing, and that the real issue is to ensure that Canadians in the Canadian scene stay patient and allow a longer gestation. And that certainly, in fact, is what has happened in Silicon Valley. Gestation period or time for startups is relatively long in Silicon Valley. But the overall pressures in terms of risk tolerance of VCs and so on is not necessarily conducive to patience. So that's the best I can do, I think, with that question.
Okay, great. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but patience is integral to this bootstrap approach that you described in your talk, where you develop partnerships, have incremental revenue, and repeat. Can you provide some more details about some of the challenges that you had on those first iterations about building a team without external financing or without initial revenue? What were some of the big challenges on those early steps of the cycle?
People have to be prepared to work for nothing. I mean, it's sweat equity. At the end of it, it's and can we afford it? That really actually is a problem. And look, I'm a dean. I have a day job. It's way easy for me to say that compared to people who are doing that development and making essentially a living wage. For the first while, it was a living wage. But hopefully, but we saw, let's put it this way, we saw such promise because everyone else was telling us that it was so promising. So that for us, it was a matter of being patient with the release of CDPR, of Cyberpunk. So we knew that it was going to make a splash. We actually had to go ahead of that by bringing together a stronger group of sales and marketing people who themselves didn't work for much. But we're now starting to see the benefit of that. So it's a really interesting question. Basically, it's this intangible thing that people believed that we would get there.
Very cool. The next question comes from Matt Medland. He was interested in the therapeutic applications that you mentioned. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and what sorts of applications did you have in mind?
So there's a variety of situations in which people are cognitively challenged. It is not the case that all autistic children are brilliant. You know, there's this stereotypical thing that, you know, if you're autistic, somehow you've got some amazing skill in something else. No, there's some cognitive aspects to having certain conditions, whether it's in earlier childhood or later in life with Alzheimer's and various other forms of dementia, where cognitive the sense data that people are normally perceiving could be exaggerated. So in order to, for example, address those cognitively challenged individuals who happen to really like computer screens, we can develop expressive faces that perhaps are very theatrical, expressing different emotions, and then start to bring it a little bit more under control so that people start recognizing, hopefully through plasticity, start recognizing some more regular expressions of anger or anxiety and so on. So that's the hope on the earlier childhood side. On later life, really it's about cognitive enhancement. Can we help restore memory through cueing, through an avatar acting out and that kind of thing? One of the things that we think might help there is having the avatar sing. So there's a variety of explorations that one can do, but I have to say very clearly that any of this is human subjects testing and has to be approached with a complete awareness of ethics in involving human subjects in this work.
Very, very interesting. So maybe keeping on the thread of humans interacting with technology, there's a number of questions in the Q&A pertaining to the confidence certifications that you touched upon. Are there any industries where you think that providing these sorts of certifications is particularly challenging? And maybe I'll throw in a bit of my own question there. Do you think that we will continue to develop statistical ML techniques, or we will move towards more causal-based approaches in attempts to provide these sorts of certifications?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's, you know, that's several workshops alone just to go through. So we absolutely need causality, but that's not enough. We need more than that. We need, of course, explainability. We need to be able, when we see a result being produced by an inscrutable black box, we would like at least to provide, to get insight on how it got there. Now, recognizing, of course, that usually what we're dealing with are high degree of freedom models that are kind of working over these very strange manifolds, and the curvature in those manifolds is weird, and they're nonlinear, and the space might even be discontinuous. So I recognize that the domains over which we're working can be quite strange, but we have to get past this. There are so many mission critical applications out there. In other words, things that threaten or could help the lives of people that will require that kind of certification. We're fooling ourselves if we think that we can let certification go. So this is really what we're starting to see it. We're certainly seeing it in the literature. People are starting to look at how one can embed causal explainable systems, perhaps, decomposing, say, a CNN so that there are some specific pathways that are model-based, and in reinforcement learning, ensuring that the data is clean, and maybe that the data itself comes from a simulator that is model-based, so that things stay within the manifold and you can guarantee that it does. So this is going to be somewhat bespoke for a while. There'll be some customization in terms of the application, but that's not too surprising when we do that in, say, this statistical analysis of a variety of devices. They have their very unique statistics, and we reason about those in various ways. So I see that emerging. It's not very sexy. But it's an extremely important area, and it without doing it, we will really limit the applicability of these new techniques.
Fantastic. Well, that's a lot to look forward to. I think we've certainly covered a lot of ground. We are almost at time, but before we go, I'd like to give a special thanks to you, Dr. Fiume. It's a very busy time at the beginning of the academic year, so I'd like to personally thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to be with us here today. This is not only a great learning opportunity, but pretty fun experience as well. So thank you again. We very much appreciate you joining us today.
Really, it's my pleasure. And although I don't see you out there, I hope some of you actually were part of my history and our shared history. And I do wish you all very well.
Great. So I'd like to remind the audience before we go that this is the first talk in a recurring series of talks. So we encourage you to keep an eye out on the program webpage for more details about our next installment. We think this is a great opportunity to hear from leaders in our field. That's it for today. Have a happy Wednesday, and we'll see you soon.